Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Lawson Data Archive webinar hosted by Nogalis. If you are attending this webinar, the likelihood is you fall into one of these three different scenarios. There's potentially another scenario we can talk about real quick. You have either upgraded to CloudSuite and you have some of your history information from your Lawson database that you weren't able to bring over. Or maybe you migrated to Workday or Oracle and were not able to bring over all your history there. Or potentially you went through a merger or an acquisition and the data from your Lawson system is either just not relevant to the new organization or you weren't able to bring it all in. And in either case, there is a good percentage of your data that is still relevant to you from a historical perspective, but it isn't available to you in a way that makes sense. So you probably still have your Lawson system running or some other solution that you've got. So your options essentially up to this point anyway have been either to keep Lawson running, which I assume is quite a few of you that are on here, otherwise you wouldn't be looking at getting off of that archive setup. The other option is to maybe throw your data all into a data lake or just have a bunch of static report files that you can reference. So the problem with the static report files is very similar to the static, the data lake model, in my opinion, and in some of the customers we've talked to. So the data lake is nice because you have some dimensionality to your data and you can cut and slice and dice it. But the problem with the data lake is you have to know how to access that data, and it isn't the simplest thing in the world to do because you need some tools to do that. Access to that data becomes kind of tricky because you can't really limit the access in a very traditional way. You know, your users can't just be expected to know how to interact with this data lake. You have to kind of create a presentation layer of some kind for them, some sort of BI level to access that data. Same problem really with static files, but static files have the additional problem of just being static, right? You have to like read through them and whatnot. So a lot of folks just decide to keep their Lawson servers running for a number of years. And as you know, there's a number of risks associated with that. So there's obviously the compliance risk of having all of these servers running around that are older. They have outdated OSs and outdated applications and outdated security layers and that sort of thing that kind of throws your own corporate compliance within IT out of order. There's security issues, right? So that you can't apply all the latest patches and greatest patches to everything, so that your applications are no longer necessarily secure. There is maintenance and accessibility. Obviously, maintaining these old applications can become quite cumbersome because certain components of it become outdated. Like, for example, you know, you're going to be on some old version of WebSphere, and it's really difficult to like make that work with the latest version of the OS. And it's possible within the enterprise, you're upgrading your Active Directory infrastructure or moving on to different domain controllers, and you have to keep around all of these different things just to maintain your access to Lawson. The connectivity of all these pieces becomes really complex, and you really end up holding back the whole organization just because of this one application you're keeping up. And then accessibility to the Lawson application gets more and more cumbersome as this happens, because new folks are joining the organization and they need access to this data. They need access to Lawson. So first of all, you have to kind of train them in Lawson, even though it no longer is relevant. And then you have to provide them somehow access to it. And it just becomes really cumbersome. Plus, you have the audit risk, which is very obvious, right? You know, your auditors are looking at this old application, and you have to explain around all of these different vulnerabilities and all of these compromises that you're making just to keep it running. So, and in addition to all of that, there's the cost of keeping everything around. So you got your hardware maintenance cost, the real estate inside your data center, and the energy cost, obviously, of running all this stuff. There's the backup, the storage. If you have a disaster recovery set up somewhere in a colo, that's added costs there, and then monitoring all of it. Internal upkeep costs. So you got obviously your IT folks that are maintaining the application still, your DBA, your network folks, and all the hardware folks that you've got. As you know, Lawson has a pretty large footprint, even if you just keep your production servers around, and most folks decide to keep production and test around for testing reasons on old reports that they want to run and whatnot. Then there's third-party support costs. We have a lot of customers that still reach out to us to have version 901 of Lawson, and they need support on specific things, and we do support them. However, there's a cost associated with that is obviously not negligible. And then there's the software and OS licenses. You're still paying licensing costs on a lot of these different outdated components, even though really not using the application for anything other than archive. So the cost is pretty substantial, and it can really add up. And then going back to the whole data lake thing, you got the query complexity and performance can be really difficult to manage. We've worked with some customers that have implemented the data lake, and it's a surprise to them that the availability of the data isn't obvious, right? You have to build that out. And so accessibility to it, and there's no built-in some auditability and tracking, so that can become cumbersome. There's obviously costs associated with it. There's still third-party support costs, and there's still software and OS licenses. So that's part of the reason why data lake hasn't really worked for a lot of our customers. So the opportunity here is to provide a clearly defined data migration to the cloud. So basically taking your entire set of data that you have from an archive history perspective, and then moving it all into the cloud. And we'll talk about that in detail. And a simple and easy way for your users to access that through just a very lightweight web-based interface. And then hopefully at the end, you'll see that this will give you the complete freedom to decommission your entire Lawson footprint, including the application, the database, any sort of backup and disaster recovery, and the whole thing can finally be turned off, and you can be done with it. And we've helped several customers do that. So so I'll just recount two of the bigger implementations of data archive solution that we've done. So the first one is currently an Oracle customer. They moved to Oracle HCM in 2019. They didn't take any of the history with them at all. And I think they regretted that kind of right away, because they realized that even though that was the right decision for them to make during the implementation, not having any of the history there was basically necessitated keeping Lawson around in its full capacity going forward. And a lot of customers are actually in that boat. And they were on version 901 of Lawson. They had HR payroll, about 1 terabyte of data, and the data migration and validation took about 2 weeks, and then the rollout and testing was a 4-week project. They did some moderate customizations because they had some custom data that they wanted to continue to have access to. The second one was a client that moved to Workday in 2020, and they took about 2 years worth of some of the history with them. So it's really difficult to see what you're missing, right? When you're doing these implementations, you can take some stuff with you, but you never really know what you left behind until you're live and you need access to that historical data. They were coming off of Lawson version 10, which is actually kind of the majority of our customers that we deal with are version 10. Some are still version 9. And they had just about 2 terabytes of data there, and it took us about 3 weeks to do the migration and data validation, and another 3 weeks for the product rollout. And they didn't do any customizations at all to that setup. And we can come back to this slide later, but the project timeline usually is essentially the first week is planning and setup of requirements and things like that. It takes us about 2 weeks to move the data and validate it, and then deploying the solution and configuring it is another 2 weeks. Testing and rollout, that kind of depends on the customer, and then completion and exit is another week. So we usually try to plan for an 8-week or so solution. So what is the solution? So the solution is a four-step process, essentially, really a three-step, because the fourth step you're live. But in the first step, we migrate you from your current legacy database. Now, your current legacy database could actually be in a cloud, right? But a lot of our customers have an on-prem footprint. So we move 100% of your database, every last byte of it, to a cloud database within AWS Cloud. And this is within your own AWS account. Okay, so it's not sitting in our account, it's actually sitting in your account. So a lot of that audit risk and security risk is automatically removed. And if you don't currently have an AWS footprint, that's perfectly okay. A lot of the customers that we deal with don't have an AWS footprint at all. And we help you set that up as a part of the process. So whether or not you're moving from an Oracle database or a SQL Server database or a DB2, it really it's minor complexity differences, but essentially we migrate all of your data there, and we have a set of tools to do that. And then we do a multi-dimensional validation on that data. So that's 1,000,000+ points of validation and complete audit report, and we provide you with all the reports that compare both databases, so that you can always store those reports and look back at them if any need for that ever arises, like you have an auditor that needs to see how that data got moved and whether or not it was validated. You'll have all of those audit reports to produce. And like I said, it's a 1,000,000+ dimensions of auditability. So we basically we slice and dice the data on both databases in really infinite ways, and we compare them using a set of programs that we have that ensure that all the data got there. Plus, in addition to that, we've noticed a lot of customers want this extra level of paranoia. So they want us to essentially produce things like a PR260 report on both systems, just so they can see the totals at the end. And those are canned reports now for us that we have because we've been asked about it so many times. So we can produce it. You can run a PR260 on your Lawson server, and we can produce the PR260 equivalent report on our system, then in the cloud, and then you can compare the two numbers together for that same date range, just to make sure that things got over correctly. And obviously, we wouldn't move on from this step until that is proven to be true. And then the next step, so this is step number 2, after we moved and validated your data, the next step is to implement our serverless solution. So our solution is completely serverless, and it sits on your AWS account. Now, what do I mean by serverless? That means there are no services running. There's no dedicated servers on the AWS platform at all, except for your database server itself. So there's a database service running within RDS within Amazon. If you're not familiar with those terms, that's totally fine. Just know that there's still a database that you can connect to, and you can actually connect to it directly as well. It's your database. You can do whatever you want with that once we've moved it over. But our platform is completely serverless. It uses Amazon's serverless infrastructure, mainly Lambda and the API gateway, to access that data in an extremely secure way. And we can get into security with you if you're ever interested in that in-depth discussion. I won't really jump into it today. Suffice it to say that we've gone through several audits with this, and we've come up with multiple layers of security due to those audits that we've implemented on this solution, so that it is as good as it gets. But what's important to understand about Amazon's serverless infrastructure and how we built our solution on top of that is that there's nothing to maintain. There's nothing that can go, there's no services that can go down, essentially, and that it infinitely scales as it goes. Meaning, if you have 2 users using this solution, obviously it's going to run fine. If you next day somehow decide that you want 200 consecutive concurrent users using it, perfectly fine. It'll run fine just the same that way. And there's no performance differences between those 2 users and the 200 users. The infrastructure scales automatically, and it's not because of some clever thing that we did. It's because of something clever that Amazon did in the way they built that platform. So again, nothing to maintain ever. And then the last step in our process is once we've implemented it, we actually integrate it with your Active Directory. So there's a SAML integration that takes place. And what that means is that in order to log into our application, you actually use your own Active Directory account, right? So your own organizational account is where you go to get an authentication to come to our application. That means that we don't maintain users in our application, and it also means that we don't hold any username, password information within that application at all. Now, that application is sitting within your AWS account, so there's really no risk even if we did, but what's nice is that we don't, so that there's only one place within your organization that you're keeping your user information. And then we're just kind of completely segregating those two things from each other. And then the last step, which isn't really much of a step at all, is we allow you access to it. So just to give you a quick overview for those of you, I noticed a few technical names as we were logging in. There's of the attendees that are on here, I can recognize some of the names, and I know some of you guys are very technical, but I don't want to bore everybody else with it, but I'll very quickly just go over these components here. So essentially on the left side of the screen, that's just your organization, that's your user with his PC, and he's got that SAML token that's getting generated, that's going to our application. The black box that you see at the very big rectangle, you see that's your AWS cloud account, and within that we create a VPC, which is a virtual private, compute box essentially. That is important to know that's sitting within your account within AWS. That's really connected to your network, and it is fully secured from outside of that, right? Nobody else can access this. And in fact, no one can access it directly. Only those Lambda functions, which is the serverless components of computing within AWS's account, can access your data. And we have several layers of security built into this to authenticate and make sure that the user that's requesting this information is a user that's not only authenticated, but is also supposed to have access to this. And it happens on every single query. And all of the static files are stored within S3. We're using Amazon's CloudFront, which is their content delivery network around the world. So if you're a global company, you'll have exactly the same type of experience with the application that if you're just located, let's say, in one little hospital in Southern California, you would have the same experience as if you had somebody access it from Japan within your company. So it would be really the same experience. And all of it is obviously secured with your certificates and all of those things. And that's really kind of the whole infrastructure. Is quite simple. There's really no other components that I'm not showing you on the screen here. And we'll get to see all of this in just a second. And from a hosting cost perspective, your costs are going to, this is the other beautiful thing about serverless, is when you're not using it, you're not getting charged for it. So your traditional server model, right, with like, for example, your Lawson server, it's running 24/7, 365, right? You're only using it between the hours of, 8 to 5 during weekdays, but it's running around the clock. Well, that's not how serverless works. Serverless works from the time the user clicks the first button, and as soon as the user gets the information they were looking for, it stops working. Meaning, every query is only getting charged for 1 second of use, essentially. And let's say a user is making, a couple hundred queries in a day. That's a couple hundred seconds. It's not really that much use. It's only like 2.5 minutes worth of computing that you're getting charged for, essentially. So our estimated monthly cost for the customers that we currently have for their entire infrastructure within AWS. Now, this doesn't include our application cost. I want to be clear about that. But your cost to AWS, our average so far is $143. And we can calculate your cost too specifically, but suffice it to say that you would have a very difficult time exceeding $500. Even with hundreds of users, you wouldn't exceed that. And this is the kind of performance that you'll see in just a minute will be exactly the performance you'll get. The kind of uptime we're talking about it will exceed all your expectations of what you've had with anything you've worked with so far, because of how AWS is set up, that's your monthly cost, essentially. And the application is available by module. So the HCM module is kind of the more popular one, but there's financials, procurement, and HCM. So HR payroll essentially. So you can choose which one of these you want to purchase. And optionally, we can do several other things as a part of this. So we can anonymize your data and test. So a lot of organizations want a test setup and a production setup. That's actually, we delivered that as part of the project, essentially. So you get your test setup and your production setup. And if you like, we can anonymize the data in the test setup for you. Now, remember, this data will never change. It's archived data. We don't ever need to refresh it. We don't never need to restore it from anything. It is read-only. No one can ever edit it. There's no edit feature within the app. So it's just sitting there in a very static way, and you'll have access to it. Now, if you have your test data anonymized, you don't have to worry so much about giving access to people for testing purposes of certain things. They can still get some real data out of that, so the numbers will be true, but let's say the employee names, addresses, phone numbers, social security, that sort of thing will have been changed in that test system. That is totally optional. Some customers want it, some customers don't. We can also do static file storage in there for you. So if you have certain reports you want to extract from Lawson before you decommission your server and you want to store it within the application for access, and then implement those security levels that we have in our application to those static files, we can host those static files there for you. There's audit logging features, so we can log when somebody logs into the application, logs out of the application, or if you want at a more granular level, we can audit what information they're accessing and log all of that information for you for digesting later if you decide you want to do that. We can also set up custom data retention policies for you. Now, this is a really, really optional feature. Very few customers are going to want this, but if it's something in your mind that you want to do, you can do this. So we've got certain customers that want a custom data retention policy. What this means is they want to keep the data for, let's say, 10 years, but they want some subsets of the data to expire after a certain number of years, so they're no longer accessible or they're completely deleted from the system. We could build those into our data retention policies within the application. Those are very custom per every customer, so we can set it up for you. Now, you'll have your own URL at your organization, okay? So let's say you were at abchospital.com is your normal domain. You can set it up to be like lawsonhistory.abchospital.com. You can figure out you can choose your own URL for this that matches your domain. So your users can go there and they will get authenticated with their own organizational user. Sign in. Okay, so now I'm signed in. And we're gonna we've essentially, this is the HR payroll demo, and you'll get a pretty good idea how the application works. I'm gonna jump into the employee, and you can have multiple companies, as you can see here. So I'm just gonna stay within this company for just a second, and I'm gonna search by employee number 1000. Now, I could have searched by his last name, okay, or his first name, okay. Or essentially, I can do it by social security number or by phone number or email. Any of those items will work. You may be familiar with this data. This is actually Lawson's test or training data set. So we're essentially using that. So some of you may be familiar with that. And you may also kind of find this screen a little familiar if you're used to using HR11. So we've essentially taken HR11 and we flattened it out for easier use. What we had in mind here is to make a screen that would be familiar to users of Lawson, but it would also not be completely alien to a new user that comes into the organization, right? Because in the next 7 to 10 years that you want to keep something like this around, you're going to have new users coming into the organization. They're going to need access to the historical information from time to time. You don't want to have to train them as to like what HR11 was, right? And how that worked. We want to give them a web experience, a web application experience. And that's exactly what we've done here. where they can see all of that information just in one view, essentially. And it's quite easy to search. And then we've taken all the drill arounds and all the other screens and have essentially flattened them out into tabs. So if I want to look at the pay rate history for this employee, I just click the tab. And this is real time happening with our application. This is the exact application that you're going to get with this solution. It isn't some mocked up demo. It is the exact application. And you'll see that in just a second, that it is fully functional. So all of this is paginated, and you can search it and filter it and download it as CSV or whatever that you need to do. So we can look at the personnel actions for this user. And again, this is paginated here. So these are all the personnel actions within this system. And if I wanted to view that specific action to see what happened, you just click that and you can view the action. And you can see all the fields that changed within that action. Deductions, so these were the deductions that were set up for this user. And if I wanted to search it for a very specific thing like PCL, and it searches right away and reduces to that. Or let's say I wanted to just download it within a CSV file. Right here. So I can just download it and use it as a CSV. And a lot of our users just love working with CSV. So that has been kind of like a really nice feature for them. All of these fields are sortable in every table view that you see very easily, and they're searchable by all the fields across the board. This isn't a very good table to do that with, but I'll show you something in a minute here. Payroll history information. So it'll only show you the payroll years for this employee that are available, so you don't have to kind of guess. And let's say I pick 2015. This is the summary for wages and the summary for the deductions for that employee. And then one thing that you're going to see here that I'm sure you haven't seen anywhere before is a real pay stub. So in 2015, I can expand and I can click on any of the pay stubs for this employee, and I can see a fully drawn out pay stub with really beautiful detail, earnings, taxes, deductions, employee paid, company paid, pre-tax, post-tax, and it's easily printable, easily exportable to PDF, so you can send them to an employee. The distributions down here, whether or not they've been reconciled, exactly where they went, which bank they went to, that sort of thing. And you can do this for all the different paychecks this employee had. And as fast as you're seeing it on the screen now, this is how fast your experience will be, because it's sitting on the same platform that we're running it off of, the AWS platform. This is one of my favorite things, and this is the field history report. So you may be using the PA340 for this right now, and we can give you that report as well. But once you see this, I don't think you're ever going to want to do it any other way. So for example, you can pick any field out of Lawson. So I'm going to take this prorated annual salary, and I'm going to go ahead and click search. And you'll see all the changes for that field throughout HR history. And if it's an action, you'll get to see the action for it as well. So this is actually the most used tab in our application, is the field history. You can choose any field within the PA dictionary, essentially all the fields within that are tracked within personnel action and HR history. You can choose any of those and search by them for any employee, and you'll get your data back right away. And again, like I said, this is the thing that's used the most, because if you're looking for history, you're very much looking for a very specific thing, and you can find it here. User fields are obviously tracked, and then benefits, nothing super interesting here. This is the employee's benefits, and it goes back as far as, we have records that you want to bring over, dependents and their benefits. And that's essentially it for the HR payroll view. But suffice it to say, what you see here is available in the financials view, and it's also available in the procurements view. So all of the components that you would expect to see there are there. I don't have test data for it for this demo, but most of you that responded were looking at the HR history demo. So you can kind of get an idea what this all will feel and look like. I'm just going to go back to this slide here. Like I said before, the first week is kind of spent on making sure that we're looking at the correct history and we're bringing over what you want. Most customers are going to select all of their history, and that's what I do recommend because there's really minimal difference between subdividing it and moving the whole thing. And subdividing it can actually be really difficult sometimes. As you can imagine, this is relational data, and subdividing it can become cumbersome. So that week is kind of spent defining all the requirements and figuring things out. Then we immediately start on building your cloud data and migrating that data over. Now that's something we have tools for, and we do validation using those same tools. We create those validation reports, we provide them to you, we make sure that you and I both agree that the data has been moved over correctly. If there's any issues, and sometimes there are minor issues that those reports indicate, and we go back and we redo those pieces of data to make sure that everything worked well. At the end, you will have a complete set of audit reports that show you that all the data got over correctly. And you'll be able to audit that. And a lot of people like going and spot checking the data, and we do recommend doing that. Then we deploy our application into your cloud. That is a very quick deployment, and you can keep a deployment kind of within your AWS account. So in case we need to redeploy, it's quite easy to do that. In case, for example, something happens to your AWS account and it all gets wiped out, it'll be pretty easy to redeploy the whole thing within just minutes. And we make all the configurations necessary, and then we connect to your Active Directory using an application, set up a lot of you folks will be on like an Azure Active Directory account, and this will be quite easy to do. So that's all done, and then you'll start testing. Your users will start testing, and the way we recommend you test is you bring up a Lawson screen on the left side, and you bring up archive Apex. Apex is the name of our solution, by the way. You bring up the Apex screen on the right side, and you'll be able to just sift through the data real quickly and be able to tell what's going on, whether or not the data matches. And then once everybody's happy, we essentially just let you use it. And you'll have your test system, your production system, 2 different URLs. You really can't mess it up, and the data never changes. You can do nightly backups if you like, but it's kind of a waste because you only need one backup. This data is never changing. Now, AWS automatically backs up for you for 30 days at a time. So it's a 30-day rolling window. You can increase or decrease that if you want, but your data is definitely safe. It's sitting in snapshots, and it's not going anywhere. With that, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to look at some of your questions because I know there are several questions here. What are the tools by which you can access data for reporting? So, okay, I'm glad you asked that, Travis. So let me get into the reporting discussion. Okay, so what you saw here, these are inquiry only screens. There's no reports here that you can run, right? Now, every customer wants a whole different set of reports built. Okay, now we've built hundreds of reports that are basically canned, and we can move them to any platform that you want. So we got customers using Power BI. We can move those reports there, and we've already built those. We got customers that want to continue to use something like Crystal. We've done that. So any BI solution that you have, the queries are already built. We can throw it in there. In addition to that, we've got our own reporting engine that you can use. So we can build your reports in here. So this is just one example of a report. This is the PR260 report. You can essentially just run it for any set of dates. So let's just do 01/01/2010. And we'll run it all the way to today. And I'm going to go ahead and confirm. Oop, logged out of there. Because when I logged in, I didn't refresh the screen. Okay, so that says report ran successfully. And once it runs, it's going to send me an email here. So this says your PR260 report just 0 minutes ago was completed. So that is done. And in that case, I can go to my print manager, and I've been running this report this morning just to kind of verify, but at 9:40, which is now, is this report that just ran. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Okay, just got downloaded here. And so it just gives you the report in a nice Excel format that you can look at. And that's our reporting solution. I prefer this over anything else because it's built into the app and it's got that nice print manager report run kind of thing that you guys are already used to. However, customers sometimes want their own reporting, and we can build whatever report you want. And we've already got 99% of any query you're ever going to ask for, we've already built, so we can essentially move it over. That was a very long-winded answer to your question, but that is the answer. So here, Linely, I believe, is your name. Will you clarify how the user will interact with the data if they're used to running AC210? Is that how they can do it? Look into it. Will they get into equivalent of AC? So I think I may have already answered this question. So you can interact with the data using the screens that we have. So we have screens for activity, we have screens for GL, we have screens for AP, all of the above. This is the HR payroll screens that you're seeing because we have the HR payroll data to demo with. But all of those different modules are built, and they're built in exactly the same way, a very flat screen with all of the different tentacles to the data as tabs up top. And then any reports that you require, we can essentially either build within our report engine, or we can build it within your own report engine, or you can build them yourself. Okay, so there's also that. Can we expect the forms to only have Lawson equivalent data such as AP90, or is it possible to replicate custom? Absolutely, you can put custom data in there. You can change how any of the reports are. So all of those customizations are yours, and we can develop them for you relatively quickly. Just to give you an idea, what the serverless platform allows us to do is to develop things extremely quickly, because we don't have to develop all the different services and things like that. It's very quick for us to develop custom views for you. Whatever your business currently requires can be built relatively fast. And those would just be charged based on services. If you have two different Lawson systems, can you combine them into one in AWS solution? That is a beautiful question. Yes, you absolutely can. As long as we build it in such a way that you can still differentiate the data, and that would be a relatively easy thing to do. The data migration step would be the only thing that would be different. We would just migrate the two of them into one, and then the application would sit on top. Yes, you can do that. Can the retention also be based on FlagSet and not just time? The retention is always custom, so you can determine any rule that you want. As long as you can define it well, we can build it for you. And it's not a very difficult thing for us to build, as long as your rules are well defined. Session timeouts, uptime alerts to customer, failed login attempts. These are beautiful questions. Any level of Infor support needed to be maintained by customer. Okay, so session timeouts are custom. Those are actually set within your own Active Directory. So we can set those there for you. The defaults are half an hour and 1 hour. You can choose between those two, or you can decide to make them longer or shorter or whatever you want. We find an hour is really kind of where people like to end up. I know some organizations have a 30-minute timeout requirement, but the most user-friendly one seems to be an hour. Failed login attempts are definitely tracked, and there's a whole audit log feature that is within the application that you can, an admin can log into your AWS account and actually look at all of those. And you can download them however way you want. Any level of Infor support needing to be maintained by customer? Absolutely not. You can turn off every piece of Lawson, the old legacy Lawson that you have can completely be turned off. In fact, that is the whole goal of this. If we can't accomplish that, we've kind of failed at what we've set out to do. So there's nothing that will need to get maintained. And we will support this application for you for as long as you decide to keep it going. On the screen that shows auditing, is this auditing for viewing records in the AWS solution? Yes. So I'm assuming you're talking about the audit of like who's logged in and what they're accessing. Yes, so that is you can choose the different levels that you want. So the basic level is who logged in and when did they log in and when did they log out. So that's a very basic level. If you want additional levels, like who's logged in and what did they look at, that's definitely very possible. It's not like a custom feature. It's just we have to build it for you, like depending on your needs. And you will look at that through the AWS console. You'll essentially log in and download your log um, for that audit. We can also build a screen for you to log into to look at that, but that's not something anybody's ever asked for. How does security work for specific users? So this is a great question. So we set up as many roles as you want. Now, keep in mind, you're not going to want to bring your Lawson security into this. Most people think that's what you want. You don't want that. Your Lawson security is based on processes. This is all read-only data. It doesn't apply anymore. Okay, so what we recommend is you try to keep it a little simple. Okay, so we can work with you on this, and we work with every customer to kind of determine something that makes sense. And it turns out what makes sense is actually a lot simpler than people like kind of originally assumed. They think that they're going to want all kinds of levels of security that they used to have brought over. And we can do all of that. It's not really cumbersome. We just have different roles that we create, right? But keeping in mind that this is all archived data and it cannot change. So there's no change functionality, right? There's no delete, there's no update. So it's all read-only. So now you just need to make sure that you're giving access to the right screens to the right people or the right subset of data to the right people. So building out your security can either be a 1 hour job or it can be a couple 100-hour job, depending on how extreme you want to get with it. But we have security roles that can get assigned to the users, and the roles are actually done on your Active Directory end, which is super nice. We build them there. We define them on our end, but we build them there so that you can assign roles on your end, and that will impact how the user can access data on our end. And then Eric asked, we may be interested in GL, APPO, RQ, and IC. Do you have a demo for those modules? So what I recommend is for those specific items that you want to see demos for is to use our, and we have a link, essentially you can go to nogalis.com/archive, and that will take you to the right page. At the bottom of that page, so let me go there real quick. At the bottom of that page, there's actually at the top and at the bottom, there's book a time. So this will take you to our calendar, and you can book a time for doing a custom demo for your organization. And there you can kind of let us know specifically what you want to see, and we can build that demo out for you. The problem is coming up with really good demo data. It may take some time depending on what you're asking for. So if you pick a time, we may get back to you and say, hey, we're going to need a couple more weeks to build that demo data specifically the way you want to see it. So we have some demo data for the financial module. We have a little bit of demo data for procurement, and we can show you what you need to see. But if you want to see some really, kind of like in-depth data and drilling kind of through the data, then we would have to build you a specific demo. The demo builds are a little bit more difficult than you would think, because you got to build out a full-on Lawson demo system in order to be able to see that information in there. But yes, we can definitely see the demo. Yes, we do have screens for line item detail on GL, and I don't have a demo of it ready for you, but like I said, if you book the time, I can definitely show you that screen. We can load it in a different demo. The thing is, in a 1 hour webinar, it's really difficult to get into all three modules, and I've tried that before during the demo, and it just ended up taking too long. Is there query access to the tables, Pete? Yes, there's definitely query access. You can get direct access to that database. Now you're kind of taking some responsibility there, so we can create database users for you on the AWS side, and we can give them to you, and we would obviously set it to query only, but then you're taking some responsibility giving that to whoever wants to use it. However, from that point on, you have all the same Lawson data tables. So just so I can kind of show you that it's the same tables. So you've got really the same set of Lawson tables that are sitting here in your AWS account you can access, and you'll you'll be able to run any query you want directly against that as well. How dependent on LSF version is the archive? Very good question. So we've got builds for 3 different MSP levels on version 901, and we've got 4 different builds in version 10. So here's the good news. We actually build on your data set. So we're not necessarily building based on a predefined version. So if you come to me with a version that we haven't used before, let's say version 10 MSP 9, which is, I believe, one of the later versions, which we don't have because customers that current are usually not looking at archiving just yet. If you wanted that, it would just be a natural part of the process anyway. We're actually converting your own schema. We're not trying to shove you into our schema. We convert your existing schema. And the reason we do that is because a lot of customers have custom data in their system and they have custom database tables. We move all of those over as well. And there's no really extra thing there for us. We're just moving them over. Now, if you were to ask us to build you a screen on top of that custom data, we can totally do that, but that would just be on a time and materials basis. And if you need to get a hold of me to discuss this solution for your organization, you can easily do so. It's just tan, T-A-N, at nogalis.com. Just send me a quick email, or you can feel free to give me a call at the number on your screen right now. And or you can just go to nogalis.com/archive and book a time there for a specific discussion and a specific demo to you. Thank you again for joining. Really appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of your day. You'll see an email from us shortly. Thank you.